Welcome in, everyone. We're so glad you're here with us today because we are starting off with a question that feels, honestly, completely counterintuitive.
Yeah, maybe even a little blasphemous, depending on, what circles of the internet you frequent.
Exactly. Seriously, I want you, the person listening right now, to sit back and just think about your absolute favorite book.
Right. The one you've read a dozen times.
Yeah, the one where the spine is completely cracked, the pages are practically falling out, and you basically have the dialogue memorized.
We all have one of those.
We do. Now imagine a major studio announces they're finally going to adapt it for the screen.
Oh, that mix of excitement and absolute dread.
Right. But what if I told you that giving a television show more screen time to adapt that favorite book of yours is actually the exact thing that ruins it?
It feels like a total paradox. I mean, our default assumption as consumers of media is that volume just equals quality when it comes to translation.
Yeah, more is more.
Right. We naturally assume that more time is the golden ticket. We want more time to flesh out the characters.
We want more time to include every single minor subplot.
Exactly. More time to explore all the intricate details of the world the author built. But when you start looking at the psychology of creativity, and the hard reality of how human beings actually process narrative information, you uncover a completely different story.
A completely different story.
The luxury of time might actually be a trap.
And navigating that exact trap is our entire mission for this deep dive today.
It's a big one.
It is. Our source material today is this truly fascinating video essay by Becca.
She's fantastic.
She really is. She's a YouTuber who does these incredible, super granular dissections of media culture and story structure.
But what makes her perspective so vital is that she's also an author herself.
Yes, she wrote a book called Noontide,
which is this really engaging, clean, young adult summer fantasy adventure.
It's got elemental abilities, some really clever magical...
and these incredibly compelling, unlikely friendships.
Right. Because she actually works in that specific YA fantasy space. She isn't just a critic looking from the outside in.
No, she has an incredibly sharp, practical eye for the actual mechanics of storytelling and world building.
So we are going to use her analysis to investigate something that has been fiercely and sometimes viciously debated for over a decade.
The highly contentious adaptations of the Percy Jackson series.
Oh boy.
Yeah, but the goal here isn't just to litigate a specific fandom's grievances.
No, not at all.
We're using the Percy Jackson adaptations as a stress test, a lens to understand the psychological, structural, and creative mechanics of adapting any story.
Any story at all.
We're going to explore why our cultural definition of the word faithfulness is completely flawed.
Totally broken.
And how the psychology of human constraints literally dictates the quality of the media you consume every single day.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Because to really understand why this matters to you and how it impacts the shows you decide to queue up on a Friday night, we have to establish the historical context of the Percy Jackson phenomenon.
Right, the baseline reality of Hollywood.
Which, as outlined in the video essay, is that adapting beloved books guarantees criticism.
It's practically a fundamental law of thermodynamics.
You are never, ever going to make everyone...
Never.
But the situation with the initial Percy Jackson movies wasn't just run-of-the-mill. The book was better criticism.
It went far, far beyond standard disappointment.
Yeah.
The original 2010s movie adaptation existed in a state of what the essay perfectly describes as perpetual public execution.
Perpetual public execution. That phrase is so good.
It's so accurate. They weren't just disliked. They were fundamentally, aggressively rejected by the core demographic they were engineered for.
The Dark Age. The fandom didn't just write bad reviews. They practically formed a militia.
They really did.
For 15 years, these movies were ruthlessly memeified, but it went deeper than joke.
Much deeper.
My absolute favorite concept from the source material is that these movies were spiritually excommunicated by the fans.
Spiritually excommunicated.
And what that actually looks like in practice is wild. You had entire fan forums where discussing the movie was actively banned.
Banned? You couldn't even mention them.
People would refuse to acknowledge the actors who played the roles.
It was a collective, willful hallucination.
Yeah, to simply pretend these movies did not exist. They were the adaptations that shall not.
That kind of spiritual excommunication is a fascinating psychological defense mechanism.
How so?
Well, when an adaptation fails so completely to capture the essence of the source material, the community decide the only way to protect the sanctity of the original text is to quarantine the adaptation entirely.
Cut it off like a bad limb.
Exactly. But that extreme, visceral reaction is exactly what set the stage for the current cultural moment.
Right.
After 15 years of quarantining those movies, the original author, Rick Riordan, partnered with Disney Plus to create a brand new adaptation.
And the fandom experienced this massive, blinding light of hope.
A huge sigh of relief.
But the crucial detail here is why they felt that hope. It wasn't exclusively because the original author was finally in the driver's seat.
No, it was intrinsically tied to the chosen format.
Yes, it was a television.
The collective sigh of relief echoing across the internet was essentially, oh, thank goodness it's not another 2-hour movie.
We have hours and hours of screen time now.
They can finally include every single chapter.
It will finally be perfectly accurate.
But that is the false hope of television.
The assumption that volume solves the adaptation problem.
Exactly. But as we sit here today, looking at the landscape, after 2 seasons of this highly anticipated author-led television show, the reality is starkly, uncomfortably different.
The fandom is on fire again.
The promised consensus just hasn't been reached. Instead, the fan base is fractured into 2 very distinct, very loud, and very angry camps.
It is a full-blown civil war in the comment sections.
It really is.
On one side, you have Camp 1. They are waving the flag that this new television show is the most fakeful adaptation ever created in the history of television.
And why do they say that?
Because Rick Riordan is in the writer's room making the changes.
Right.
Their logic dictates that because the literal creator of the universe doing it, everything we see on screen is canon. End of discussion.
Any change is just an author updating his own work.
Exactly. And looking at the exact same television show, the exact same creative decisions, you have Camp 2.
And this group is seriously questioning if Rick Riordan actually knows what he's doing with his own story.
Which sounds crazy to say out loud.
I know, but they are watching the execution of the narrative on screen and feeling a profound, undeniable disconnect, despite the author's heavy involvement.
Which is wild to think about. How can you have the creator in the room and still feel like the story is wrong?
This raises an important question. Is the core debate within this fandom actually about canon at all? Or is this massive vitriolic divide exposing the inherent dangers and structural trap of television adaptation?
That is the million-dollar question.
To answer that, we have to establish a framework for the specific pressures that are applied to a narrative when it is violently ripped from the page and forced onto the screen.
I really appreciate how the video essay breaks this down, because it gives us a concrete vocabulary for something we all instinctively feel when we watch a movie based on a book.
It really clarifies things.
The source material categorizes adaptational changes 3 distinct pressures: story addition, story substitutions, and story subtraction.
If we examine those categories, the mechanics of adaptation become much.
Let's start with the first.
The first pressure, story additions, is essentially the process of expansion.
Right.
This occurs when the adaptation introduced entirely new scenes, fresh characters, different settings, or expanded plot points that simply did not exist anywhere in the original text.
Ooh, you see this constantly when a studio realizes they have a hit on their hands and they want to build out a cinematic universe.
Oh, absolutely.
They start giving a minor side character from Chapter 4 an entire backstory just to set up a spin-off.
Happens all the time.
Then we have the second category, which is story subs. This is
meaning the element exists in the source material, but its form, its function, or its purpose is mutated for the screen.
Like maybe a character who is described as blonde in the book is cast with a brunette actor.
Or, more structurally, maybe a crucial, tense conversation between 2 characters is kept in the script, but the setting is moved.
Moved from a quiet, boring coffee shop to a high-speed car chase.
Purely to make the scene more visually dynamic for a viewing audience.
Right. Those first 2 pressures usually cause some grumbling, but the third category is where the actual friction lies.
Story subtractions.
Yes, this is compression. It is the infamous, often painful kill your darlings phase of writing.
Subtraction involves taking a red pen and aggressively cutting scene, merging 3 different supporting characters into one, and dropping entire plot points into the incinerator.
And historically, subtraction is the single most explosive trigger for any fandom.
Oh, without a doubt.
If a studio takes away a fan's absolute favorite chapter, or cuts out that one specific witty line of dialogue they have had memorized since they were 12,
they are going to notice.
And they're going to write a 1,000-word essay on Reddit about it.
But the outrage over subtraction often ignores a fundamental reality of the medium.
What's that?
Subtraction isn't just a stylistic choice. It is a mandatory requirement born of physics and mathematics.
Math strikes again.
A standard 300-page novel contains a vast, sprawling amount of internal monologue, descriptive prose, and narrative tangents. When you transition that specific volume of text into a film, there is simply too much literal content to physically fit into a standard runtime.
You physically cannot do it unless you want to lock the audience in a theater for. There's a brilliant joke in the video essay about. The creator mentions that her sister actually enjoys watching this highly specific, entirely unedited, hours and hours and hours long version of Shakespeare's.
That is dedication.
Hey, power to her. But the general movie-going public is absolutely not going to sit through a 12-hour, perfectly one-to-one, accurate adaptation of a young adult fantasy.
It defies the physical limitations of the human bladder, let alone attention span.
Exactly.
That physical impossibility brings us directly back to the trap of the television format.
How so?
Fans inherently understand, even if they complain about it, that a 2-hour movie has to cut. It's a given.
Sure.
So when a TV series is announced, their brains make a logical leap. They assume that the extended runtime, say an 8-hour season, somehow cures the subtraction problem.
They think, finally, we have enough time to show everything on the page.
But mathematically, that is a complete fallacy. Even an 8-hour television season does not provide anywhere near enough screen time to literally adapt every single page of a novel in a 1-to-1 ratio.
Right, so the red pen still has to come out.
It has to.
The subtraction has to happen regardless of whether it's a movie or a TV show. But the assumption that television somehow magically eliminates the need for subtraction creates incredibly dangerous illusions.
Not just for the fans, but for the producers making the show.
Because they have 8 hours instead of 2, they feel significantly less pressure to cut.
So we really have to look at the end result. Is that extended screen time actually helping those producers streamline the narrative into something dynamic and riveting?
Or is the luxury of time actively destroying their ability to communicate the core value story?
To understand why more time might actually be a massive detriment to creativity, we have to look at a brilliant analogy from the video essay regarding the psychology of constraints.
The Twitter problem.
Yes, the Twitter problem.
I was absolutely fascinated by this. Think about the early days of Twitter, or really how the platform still functions structurally today.
Okay.
You, as a user, are given a strict, entirely non-negotiable parameter, a 280-character.
The box is very small.
Very small. The central question is, what happens to human expression when you severely limit it in a tiny box?
Logically, you would assume expression becomes stunted.
Right. You'd think people would just say less, or that complex thoughts would be impossible, relegated only to short, punchy, superficial statements.
But human behavior in digital spaces entirely contradicts that logic.
Complete.
Instead of being silenced or overly restricted by the parameter, human beings instinctively find creative shortcuts to bypass it.
They hacked the system.
When faced with a 280-character limit, users didn't give up on long-form complex thought. They invented the thread.
Ah, the thread.
They began sequentially numbering their replies to their own tweets, 1 of 10, 2 of 10, and so on.
They engineered a structural workaround that allowed them to turn a tiny 280-character constraint into a serialized essay that is thousands long. We've all fallen down those rabbit, reading massive, gripping, multi-part story threads at 2 in the morning.
Definitely.
And what this proves, and this is a really fundamental psychological truth, is that humans are actually more creative, more inventive when they are boxed into strict parameters.
When you give a creative person absolute unbound freedom, they often freeze or they just ramble aimlessly.
But when you give them a tiny rigid box, their brain fires up and starts solving the puzzle of how to max out that box.
Here's where it gets really in, because we can apply that exact psychological phenomenon directly to storytelling and adaptation.
Okay, wait.
When we look at the 2-hour movie runtime, we shouldn't view it as a debt. That limited screen time acts as an invisible pressure.
An invisible pressure.
It is a strict, unyielding parameter that forces writers, directors, and producers to sit down and deeply, ruthlessly consider what they're going to expand, what they're going to translate, and most crucially, what they are going to aggressively compress.
It's forcing them to make hard choices.
Exactly.
And that invisible pressure isn't just about runtime in a vacuum. It's about the literal cognitive mechanics of how the human brain handles decisions.
This is where Hick's law comes in.
Right. The source material brings up Hick's law, which basically dictates that the more choices a person has presented to them, the longer it takes for them to make a decision.
And the more taxing that decision becomes.
It is the ultimate paradox.
Our culture assumes having more options is a luxury, a sign of abundance. But cognitive science tells us it is actually a severe burden.
It creates decision fatigue.
When you have too many paths, you expend all your energy just choosing the path rather than actually walking it.
There is a fantastic, incredibly relatable analogy for this in the video essay.
The ice cream analogy.
Yes. Think about walking into a Wendy's fast food restaurant. You want a Frost. You look at the menu, and it presents you with a very strict 2 choices.
Chocolate or vanilla?
Your brain processes that parameter instantly. Boom, chalk. You make the decision in 2 seconds because the box.
It's easy.
Now, imagine walking into a Baskin-Robbins. You are immediately confronted with 31 different brightly colored flavors.
And suddenly you're frozen?
You are standing there for 5 minutes, paralyzed, analyzing the merits of mint chocolate chip versus Rocky Road.
Asking the teenager behind the counter for tiny pink spoon samples.
Stressing over making the wrong choice. More choice mathematically equals more delay and less confidence. That is Hick's law in action.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of Hollywood adaptation, moving a beloved story from a movie format to a television format is not just a simple change in medium.
Yeah.
It is a fundamental seismic shift in the constrained environment.
Yeah.
It is literally moving the writer's room from Wendy's to Baskin-Robbins.
That completely reframes the entire argument.
It does.
Because the core issue isn't the literal number of minutes they have available to put on screen. The real danger is how the creators behave when they believe they have an abundance of time.
Precisely. When a showrunner is handed 8 hours instead of 2, they are staring at 31 flavors of potential story paths.
They suddenly have the option to explore minor character arcs that go nowhere.
Deep historical lore that doesn't impact the plot.
Tangential world-building exercise.
But more runtime equals more possible story path, which directly results in extreme, often crippling difficulty in prioritizing what actually matters to the core narrative.
The invisible pressure that forces ruthlessness, that forces them to choose the chocolate frosty and move on. To put some hard, undeniable numbers to this theory, source material introduces a concept that anyone in business or writing.
The 80-20 rule.
There is always some variability to this depending on the industry you apply it to, but in the context of narrative storytelling, the central
20% of your story elements contribute to 80% of the emotional impact on the audience.
It is the concept of the vital few versus the trivial many.
The heavy emotional lifting of any narrative, the parts that make you cry, the parts that make you cheer, is done by a surprisingly small, highly concentrated fraction of the actual written content.
The video essay uses the creator's own book, Noontide, as the perfect test.
Right.
She explains that you could theoretically take a pair of scissors and physically cut 80% of the pages out of her book.
Just throw them in the trash.
And as long as you keep the correct 20%, the vital beating heart of the story that drives the emotional journey and the plot progression, the resulting vastly shorter story would still perfectly preserve the tone, the quality, and the emotional resonance of the original longer version.
It's all about finding that core.
I absolutely love the internet culture reference she drops to illustrate this. She mentions that meme about the Lord of the Rings.
Oh, the Fellowship of the Ring meme?
Yeah, you have the story at 100% power, which is the full extended edition runtime.
And then you have the story at 99% power, which is just a picture of the core emotional arc.
It's a joke, but it perfectly illustrates the reality that a vast minority of the content carries the vast majority of the narrative weight.
And when you accept that mathematical reality, it completely changes the dynamic when we compare movie to television shows.
Let's run the numbers.
Let's look at the specific numbers provided in the analysis. Imagine a standard novel takes roughly 7 hours to read aloud.
7 hours of raw narrative content.
If a studio adapts that 7-hour book into a standard 2-hour movie, the movie is only physically adapting 28.6% of the original text.
28%. That is a tiny fraction.
It is.
Just by the unforgiving laws of mathematics and the constraint of the theatrical format, a movie is naturally forced by default to hunt down that core 20%.
The invisible pressure of the 2-hour window acts as a natural, unavoidable constraint.
Forcing the creators to find the emotional center because they literally physically do not have time for anything else.
Now, obviously, movies do not always successfully identify the correct 20%.
No, many fail spectacularly.
They choose the wrong element to focus on. But the pressure to try and find it is unavoidable. The constraint forces the attempt.
Right.
Now, let's look at the television map. Take that exact same 7-hour book and adapt it into a 5-hour television season.
Okay.
Suddenly, the adaptation accounts for 71.4% of the original content.
And right there is the Baskin-Robbins trap.
Yes.
Because the TV show has the flexibility and, more importantly, the overwhelming temptation to adapt closer to 100% of the book, it completely atrophies the creator's prioritization muscle.
They stop asking the vital question, what is the absolute emotional core of this chapter?
And they start asking the dangerous question, how can we fit this minor, irrelevant side quest into episode 3 just because the fans.
This weakening of the prioritization muscle leads directly to a phenomenon known in psychology as cognitive load theory.
I love how deep this goes.
Think about your brain's working memory like the RAM on a computer.
Okay, right.
This theory posits that human beings process information best when it is delivered to them in distinct, manageable chunks.
And crucially, when irrelevant details are minimized or eliminated entirely.
Exactly. Our working memory has a finite, hard-capped capacity.
If you overwhelm that RAM with extraneous information, the system bogs down.
And the core message is entirely lost.
Applying that to the current civil war over the Percy Jackson television show is incredibly revealing.
It maps on perfectly.
If you look at the specific recurrent criticisms being leveled against the series by both fans and professional critics, they align flawlessly with cognitive.
What are people saying?
People are constantly complaining that the show relies heavily on telling versus showing.
The classic writing sin.
Viewers are frustrated because characters will literally stand around in a circle over-explaining the intricate historical details of Greek mythology instead of the show dramatizing that mythology through action, tension, and conflict.
The show's accused of intensely front-loading the world, essentially dumping massive files of data directly onto the viewer's RAM. Because the showrunners have the 8-hour runtime to include all the mythological backstory, all the family trees, and all the lore present in the books, they succumb to the temptation to include it.
Right, because they can.
But by doing so, they maximize the irrelevant detail, completely overloading the viewer's cognitive capacity.
By the time the actual emotional character happens, the viewer's brain is full of data to process.
The emotional stakes are completely diluted by exposition.
It creates this wild, unbelievable paradox.
It really does.
This is exactly why some fans are walking away from the new, highly accurate TV show feeling incredibly conflicted and
The video essay points out that, paradoxically, some viewers are starting to realize that those widely hated 2010s movies, the ones they spiritually excommunicated and swore to never speak of again,
are actually, in some strange ways, more enjoyable to watch, or at least less emotionally flat than their technically accurate TV counterpart.
The movies, constrained by their 2-hour Wendy's menu, had to prioritize narrative momentum and character emotion over exhaustive textbook mythological exposition, which forces us to confront a very difficult, very subjective question that strikes at the heart of fan culture.
Okay, what is it?
If an adaptation includes all the correct lore, hits every plot point, and includes every character, but feels emotionally flat and clinically sterile, is it actually a good adaptation?
That leads to the second major topic, the source material address, the war over the definition. I want to throw this question directly to you, the listener. Seriously, think about this.
It's a tough one.
When you angrily type on Twitter that you want a movie to be an accurate adaptation of a book, what does that actually mean to you?
Do you mean you want the dialogue on the screen to match the page word for word?
Do you mean you want the characters to look exactly, perfectly as you pictured them in your head?
It's a much harder, more nebulous question to answer than it seems on the surface. It is deeply nebulous, and the video essay categorizes the fandom's typical responses into two prevailing, completely opposed definitions.
Let's hear them.
The first approach, which we can call Definition A, defines faithful as keeping as much literal physical content from the source material exactly the same as possible.
So no changes allowed.
Under this strict, almost mathematical definition, any adaptational change, whether it is an expansion, a compression, or a translation, is viewed as an inherent negative.
The simple fact that it was altered from the original text makes it a betrayal. It's the counting scenes mentality. If the book has 10 chapters, the show better have 10 episodes mirroring them.
Right.
Now, the video essay is very careful to say it isn't casting moral judgment. It makes logical sense in a very self-literal.
But then you have Camp 2, which operates under Definition B. Definition B aligns the concept of faithfulness, not with the raw, literal content on the page, but entirely with authorial intent.
Authorial intent.
It operates on the premise that whatever the original author wants to express about their story is, by default, undeniable canon.
Even if the author's new vision for the screen completely contradicts the bare-bones factual text of a book they wrote 20 years ago.
Exactly. It is still considered the ultimate, unquestionable truth of the narrative.
Wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
If Rick Riordan literally invented Percy Jackson out of thin air, shouldn't he have the ultimate right to change whatever he wants? It's his sandbox. He built the castle.
Sure.
Why are fans so mad if it's literally his own creation? Why is Definition B so controversial?
Because it assumes the author and the emotional core of the text are eternally, perfectly synchronized.
Ah, I see.
And that is the defense shield being heavily utilized for the Percy Jackson TV show right now. By the metric of Definition B, the Disney Plus show is not just most coastally accurate. It is 100% faithful.
It isn't 80% faithful or 99% faithful.
It is 100% faithful because Rick Riordan, the original creator of the universe, is the one in the room facilitating, approving, and writing every single substitution, addition, and subtraction.
But if we step back and analyze both of these definitions critically, we see massive inconsistencies and impracticalities in how fans actually consume and judge media in the real world.
We can test these definitions against historical examples of Hollywood adaptations, and the logic of both A and B immediately falls apart.
Let's look at the receipts, because the history of cinema totally wrecks these definitions.
It really does.
First up, let's look at the Will Smith sci-fi action I, Robot.
Oh, classic example.
If you've ever read the original Isaac Asimov book, you know that the movie kept almost nothing.
It shares a title and the 3 laws of robotics, and that's about it.
It is an absolute masterclass in extreme story substitution and subtraction.
Under definition A, it is a catastrophic, insulting failure of an adaptation.
Yet, it is widely regarded by audience as a phenomenal, highly successful, and deeply enjoyable sci-fi.
Conversely, look at the Hunger Games film franchise.
Oh, great counterexample.
The filmmakers, they were incredibly meticulous. They kept almost all the core elements, plot points, and character arcs intact from Suzanne Collins' original novels.
It leans heavily, almost obsessively, into definition A.
And the result, it is critically acclaimed, massively successful at the box office, and widely celebrated by fans as one of the most faithful and brilliant YA adaptations ever.
Okay, so far we have one movie that changed everything and was great, and one movie that changed almost nothing.
That's confusing enough.
But the ultimate curveball, massive, undeniable contradiction, completely breaks the brains of hardcore fandom, is Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Yes, The Lord of the Rings is the perfect stress test for these definitions.
It really is.
If you ask any devoted J.R.R. Tolkien scholar or hardcore lifelong fan, they will readily admit, often with a heavy sigh, that the Peter Jackson films feature massive structure.
Huge chunks missing.
Entire beloved characters like Tom Bombadil, who has entire chapters dedicated, are erased from existence.
Crucial thematic subplots, like the scouring of the Shire at the end of the story, are complete side.
There are heavy, dramatic substitutions made to character motivation to fit the pacing of a cinematic act.
So by definition A, keep the literal content the exact same method. The Lord of the Rings movies should be utterly despised by them.
They are full of what definition A considers inherent negative.
And yet, the reality in the culture is the exact opposite.
Tolkien fans resoundingly, overwhelmingly accept and celebrate these films as profoundly, beautifully faithful adaptations of the books.
They are considered the absolute gold standard of fantasy cinema.
So, if a mathematically inaccurate, heavily compressed adaptation can be universally considered the gold standard of faithfulness, our original definitions are completely broken.
Totally broken.
It means the debate over the Percy Jackson show, whether it would be better if they kept more things the same, or if fans must blindly accept every change just because the author made them, is built on a fundamentally flawed premise.
That actually completely changes how I look at adaptations.
It's a paradigm shift.
Which brings us to the new, much healthier, much more nuanced definition that the video essay presents to the consideration.
Let's hear it.
She proposes this, and I really want you to observe this. Faithfulness is an adaptation's ability to preserve, maintain, and express the core elements of the original source.
It is a profound shift in perspective.
It really simplifies.
The primary takeaway is this. Faithfulness isn't a metric of how much raw data you include from the book. It is a measure of how clearly you communicate the emotional truth of the story.
It's prioritizing quality over quantity and emotion over
Exactly.
But the video essay also poses a really spicy question here, one that directly challenges the authorial intent camp.
Okay.
Can an original author misrepresent the core elements of their own story?
It's a highly provocative thought, but when you look at how human beings evolve, the answer is undeniably yes.
Yes, people change.
An author's perspective on their own work changes over decades. What was once a fast-paced, visceral action sequence written by a 30-year-old might be viewed by the 50-year-old author as an opportunity for deep, meandering philosophical dialogue.
So is Rick Riordan allowed to make massive structural changes to the Percy Jackson story for the TV show?
Absolutely. It is his intellectual property he owns.
But is he immune from criticism if those modern changes ultimately miscommunicate or dilute the original emotional core that made fans fall in love with the books in the first place?
No, he is not.
That perfectly explains why so many fans are experiencing such severe cognitive dissonance watching the Disney Plus.
It's the disconnect.
They are watching something that is technically much closer to the literal A to B plot of the books than those old 2010s movies were, yet it somehow feels wildly unfaithful to the spirit and the energy.
But we don't just have to speak in abstract theories here.
We have proof.
The source material brings in the ultimate, undeniable proof of this new definition of faith, and I'm so incredibly excited to talk about this part.
It really is the unlikely hero of the entire Percy Jackson adaptation discourse.
Yes, the ultimate example that proves you can change almost everything and still be perfectly, beautifully faithful is The Lightning Thief, the Percy Jackson musical.
Now, if you haven't heard of this, you might be raising an eyebrow. Stage a musical. Really?
Well, let's look at the absolute gauntlet of constraints this theatrical production was operating under.
The constraints are staggering, especially when you compare them to the near infinite budget of a Disney television show.
The musical has a runtime of roughly 2 hours.
That is the exact same invisible pressure, the exact same natural constraint as the maligned 2010.
Furthermore, it only features 18 characters in the book, and of those 18, only 7 have major speaking or singing roles.
It is a remarkably small, contained, highly restricted production.
Because of the inherent limitations of live theater budget, tiny cast size, strict runtime, physical stage space.
The creators of the musical had to aggressively add, translate, and extract a massive amount of content from the.
They were forced to compress the story relentlessly just to make it function on a stage.
Yet despite these heavy, undeniable modifications, or if we follow the logic of Hicks' law and the invisible pressure, perhaps entirely because of them, the musical is widely, almost universally, considered by the fandom to be the best non-book version of the story in existence.
It is arguably the most faithful adaptation ever created across any medium.
Why? Because the extreme constraints force the creators to flawlessly identify and master that core 20%.
And the specific mechanism they use to achieve this emotional mastery is a staple of musical theater. The I
am obsessed with the essay's breakdown here because it is so incredible.
For anyone unfamiliar, an I want song is designed to instantly, efficiently establish a character's core motivation, their deepest internal struggles, and their overarching goal, usually occurring within the first act of the show.
It is the ultimate antidote to the telling versus showing problem that plagues the.
Instead of halting the plot narrative to have an older character or a narrator explain a young character's internal psychology, the character vocalizes their complex emotional state directly to the audience through music,
which inherently carries a massive amount of emotional weight.
Let's really dig into the specific lyrics highlighted in the source material, because they are a masterclass in adaptation.
First, we have the protagonist, Percy Jackson. His I Want song is called Good Kid.
What's amazing is that it strips away all the shiny mythology, all the monsters, all the magic swords, and focuses entirely on his very grounded, very human desire to simply be believed, trusted by adults, and to feel like he has inherent value.
The lyrics go, I never tried to do anything, I never mean to hurt anyone, I try to be a good kid, a good son, but no one ever will take my side. All I ever do is take the fall. I swear that I'm a good kid, guess I'm good for nothing at all.
It's absolutely heartbreaking, and it's incredibly, ruthlessly efficient storytelling.
Think about the cognitive load here.
In the span of a 3-minute song, you completely, viscerally understand the central internal conflict of Percy's character.
You don't need 5 separate episodes of him getting kicked out of various boarding schools to understand his profound alien.
The song delivers the raw emotional impact of that isolation instantly, bypassing the need for endless exposition.
Then you have Annabeth Chase, her song is called My Grand Plan.
This song doesn't waste time explaining the genealogical family tree of Olympus.
It reveals her incredibly complicated, strained relationship with her mother, the goddess Athena.
It reveals her desperate, burning need to prove her worth to an absent parent, which perfectly explains why she is so intensely focused on leading a dangerous quest.
She sings, and someday soon, I swear, I don't know how or when, but I promise you I'll never be invisible again. Someone will notice me.
What's fascinating here is how this specific lyric functions dramatically within the narrative.
Fans of the original book know that Annabeth's fatal flaw, the psychological weakness that could ultimately destroy her, is hubris or deadly, overwhelming pride.
A lesser adaptation, perhaps a television show with too much time on its hands and a weakened prioritization muscle, might just have another character literally walk up and say, Annabeth, your fatal flaw is hubris.
That is telling. It's a data.
But the musical shows us her hubris. By listening to her sing about her desperate, prideful, almost arrogant need to never be invisible again, we feel the danger of her ambition.
We believe the flaw because we are actively experiencing her, not just receiving a clinical data point about her profile.
It's so brilliant. It takes a textbook definition of hubris and turns it into a relatable egg.
And then there is Grover the satyr.
The video essay talks about the immense emotional weight of his song, The Tree on the Hill.
The creator notes that she actually cried the first time she heard it.
It's sung by George Salazar, who a lot of theater fans know from his phenomenal work in Be More Chill, and his performance here is just transcendent.
The song explores Grover's immense, crushing, paralyzing guilt over the death of his friend Thal.
The lyrics in the bridge are an absolute gut punch. And maybe if I'd been a little bit braver, maybe if I'd stayed behind to fight, but maybe doesn't let me go back and save her. Maybe it doesn't make it right.
It perfectly distills the life or death stakes of Grover's entire...
In many adaptations, the sidekick is just there for comic.
But this song ensures he isn't just a comedic foil. He is a fully realized character driven by a profound, terrifying fear of repeating a fatal mistake.
You immediately understand that he will do whatever it takes, sacrifice anything, to ensure what happened to Thalia does not happen to Percy.
The 15-minute miracle. That is exactly what we are looking for.
Think about the sheer math of what this musical accomplished.
In a combined runtime of roughly 15 minutes across these three songs, the listener is gifted a comprehensive, profound, and deeply emotional understanding of exactly who these three core characters are.
What internal forces are driving their motivations?
And the emotional arcs they are destined to complete over the rest.
The musical triumph precisely because it respects and even weaponizes the constraints of its medium.
It does not waste precious time trying to exhaustively explain the geopolitical mechanics of Mount Olympus.
Instead, it perfectly maintains the core themes, the emotional tones, and the genre of the original novel.
It proves, unequivocally, that communicating the emotional journey of the characters is vastly, undeniably superior to merely counting scenes and ticking boxes of literal plot accuracy.
So what does this all mean for you, the person listening right now?
When we zoom out from Camp Half-Blood and look at the broader landscape of how we interact with media.
When people are engaged in these fiery, toxic arguments online about adaptation, what are they actually fighting about deep down?
The essay's conclusion is that they aren't actually arguing.
They aren't truly arguing about page-to-screen accuracy or whether a character's hair color identically matches the book's description.
They are arguing about whether the story on the screen feels like it knows what it is about.
Exact. And determining whether a story knows what it is about is a complex, deeply nuanced evaluation.
It requires a profound understanding of the underlying emotional journey of the author and not just a superficial checklist audit of included plot points.
An adaptation fails when it forgets how to make us feel what the original book made us feel, regardless of how much screen time it has, how many budget it blows, or how many historical lore details it gets technically right.
Which is why the invisible pressure of constraint is actually a creator's best friend, even if it feels like a massive burden.
It forces them to stop meandering and find the actual heart of the story.
And that realization leaves us with a final, highly provocative thought to consider regarding the future of entertainment and how we will consume stories.
Throughout this entire deep dive, we have established that constraint, limited runtime, limited budgets, limited formatting is the invisible pressure that forces human creators to prioritize the emotional core of a narrative.
They have to find the vital 20% that matters because they literally cannot afford the trivial 80% that doesn't.
Right. It's survival of the fittest for plot points.
But look closely at the trajectory of technology right now.
Look at the rapid, exponential advancement of artificial intelligence and generative video.
We are fast approaching a horizon where it will be incredibly cheap, incredibly fast, and incredibly easy to command an AI create a 100% completely accurate, 50-hour-long, one-to-one visual translation of any book.
You could theoretically feed a 1,000-page fantasy novel into an engine and receive a video output that perfectly, flawlessly mirrors every single line of text, every minor description of a tree, every sprawling narrative tangent.
Oh, wow, that is equal parts fascinating and terrifying.
So the question you have to ask yourself as a consumer is this. If the invisible pressure of constraint is completely surgically removed by technology, if producers and creators no longer have to make painful human choices about what to cut or change because they have infinite cheap digital runtime, will we lose the art of the adaptation entirely?
If an AI gives us a flawless, unedited 50-hour visual translation of our favorite book, will it actually feel full?
Or will we find ourselves drowning in 100% literal accuracy, desperately missing the emotional clarity and the soul that only human constraint can create?
That is a staggering thought to leave on. Be careful what you wish for when you demand total accuracy.
You might just get a 50-hour, perfectly literal adaptation that makes you feel absolutely nothing.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. I hope this conversation gives you a completely new, sharper lens.
The next time you sit down on your couch, grab the popcorn, and cue up that highly anticipated big-budget adaptation of your absolute favorite book, don't just ask if they kept your favorite minor.
Ask yourself if they had the courage that actually